Hello, students. So this is the lecture for chapter 15 for understanding the faith. Couple things before we start. You need to print off the notes. It's on Google Classroom. There is nothing for you to fill in on the notes because I gave you complete notes. What you will notice if you look at the video as opposed to the notes, I have things that are highlighted in pink. You are responsible for those things, and I will do my best to say them. How you want to mark your paper is completely up to you, but you're responsible for what I say. And you will have a quiz on this next week. So this is the lecture, and it is available to everyone. And I don't think any of that is rocket science or new to you. So let's get on, and we'll have this weird time when I have to change the papers, and when my hands get tired of holding this, the camera will shake. So hopefully that won't be too bad, but I better hurry up. Here we go. So the question for chapter 15 is, what's the deal with hell? So first of all, we need to cover the question issues, just looking at the question itself before we dive into it. In our day and age, judgment is unusual. Now you can look at that multiple ways, okay? You can look at it as though people aren't really judged for anything, or they're judged for everything. So we're just going to cover both of those sides with judgment is unusual in that it is really uneven. People are judged for speaking the truth, and people are judged for people are not judged for lying. That seems to be more of what is going on right now. Judgment right now also is very pointed. If you don't agree with something, the judgment is not pointed at the act, but the judgment is pointed at you because you don't agree with it. And judgment is just usually seen as bad when in fact there is benefit in judgment. But anytime you talk about hell, the idea of judgment comes up. So that's why we're talking about judgment. Okay, so first of all, judgment is unusual. Second of all, eternal judgment, because most people know when you talk about hell, it's not a temporary thing. We're talking about eternal judgment is even more unusual than just judgment. So eternal judgment, more so. And then it is eternal judgment for not doing one thing. Now, I know there's way more to hell than this, but if you just stopped someone on the street or you talked to someone in passing, usually the limits of what they understand about hell is it is for not doing one thing. And that one thing is asking Jesus into your heart, agreeing with him that you're a sinner. And, you know, there's more than one thing really there. But the general sense of information about hell is it is eternal judgment for not doing one thing. So we haven't even gotten to the question. We're just trying to understand it first, okay? The next thing we need to do is we need to look at the perspectives of, well, not perspectives of, the perspectives that we're dealing with. So if you talk to just a general somebody and they are in the category above, it's eternal judgment for not doing one thing, you're going to see some things. And you'll notice on the paper there's a 1 and a 2. And so the one is one perspective and two is the other perspective. So the first perspective is from finite creatures. Humans are finite creatures. It's a fancy word for saying we're creatures who have limits or bounds. What do I mean by that? I mean, everybody dies, okay, except for Enoch, who walked with God, and I think it was Elijah in the Old Testament. And if you believe, if you were one of those people, and I'm talking general public who believed in Jesus, you know that he raised from the dead, but he died. Okay, so Enoch and Elijah, I think I have those right. Right now they don't sound right, but we'll go with that, and if I say something wrong, I'll get back to you and tell you that I was wrong. Anyway, finite creatures. In other words, we die. We have a limit to our lifespan. Now, normally finite creatures, the perspective is that everyone is equal. All humans are equally humans, and humans are the highest form of authority. Now, this is a perspective. When you have this perspective, or you live in a world that has this perspective regularly, God ends up not being better than any human. God is not better than me and you. And when he chooses to judge eternally for one thing that is not done, he sounds an awful lot like a grumpy old man who may or may not exist. Because if you believe that finite creatures, humans, are the highest form of authority, you really don't have any room in your perspective for a God of any type. You take that place. But, and here's perspective number two, if there is a God and he is infinite, meaning he doesn't have limits or bounds, he doesn't die, he's eternal, then can all humans still be equal? Yep. But God is not human. He is outside of humanity. Now, one of the traits that he has, or that he is, is that he's eternal. But often when you hear someone talk about God being outside of humanity, there's a bunch of traits that show that he is outside of humanity. And the fancy word for that is transcendent. Now, please note, eternal does not equal transcendent, but eternal is involved with being transcendent. So if you hear that God is transcendent, Jesus is transcendent, it means that he is not a human. He exists outside of humanity. He is more than. And one of the ways we know that is knowing that he is eternal. So then there's this quote by Jonathan Edwards, who lived back in the 1800s. And you're just going to notice all the infinite words. And you can get lost, but I want you to sit with each sentence for a little bit. So I'm going to read it slow. He said, God is a being infinitely lovely, because he hath infinite excellency and beauty. To have infinite excellency and beauty is the same thing as to have infinite loveliness. He is a being of infinite greatness, majesty, and glory, and therefore he is infinitely honorable. So remember, infinite means not having any limits or bounds. He's infinitely honorable. He is infinitely exalted above great potentates of the earth. Potentates just means rulers. And highest angels in heaven. And therefore he is infinitely more honorable than they. His authority over us is infinite. And the ground of his right to our obedience is infinitely strong. For he is infinitely worthy to be obeyed himself, and we have an absolute, universal, and infinite dependence upon him. So that sin against God being a violation of infinite obligations, must be a crime infinitely heinous and so deserving of infinite punishment. Now, what this does, you can get overdone with the infinite. Okay, God's infinite. But if you look at the fact that he is infinite and eternal, infinite and eternal are kind of the same thing. It is not just that lying is wrong because it masks the truth, but and that's true. But because when we lie against God, that debt that we incur because we lie is an infinite debt because it is against an infinite God. So really the perspectives are either finite or infinite. Okay? Now, I'm going to pull this closer. We'll see what happens. On to. So the question behind the question really is hell just? It's kind of like saying, well, is hell fair? There's going to be struggles. First of all, there's struggles with the concept of hell because we view it from our perspective. And remember, we're finite creatures. And our training, we live in this world, and yes, you probably live in a Christian family who has taught you right and wrong, but you live in a culture that often, almost every day, 99% of the day, calls wrong right. Okay, and this all comes from being a human and living in a fallen world. Okay. Also, hell is not a neutral subject because there are consequences involved. Okay. It is not something that you can say, I can take it or leave it. That's not an option. There are also struggles with how God chooses to deal with evil. Remember, we have a human perspective and training. We're not God. So when we try and look at hell and put on God's perspective, it's just hard for us. But nonetheless, we should try. There's also great emotions involved. We may not like Hitler. He killed lots and lots of people. And you could think of somebody else that you really don't like who's been incredibly mean. You could think of child molesters. You could think of rapists. You could think of people who mutilate other people. Just the worst person possible. And it is not just rationality that you are dealing with. You have emotions in this game, and there are emotions involved in this punishment. And let's also add, what if you know someone who is a really nice person, but they reject God and then they die, and you don't know if they were saved or not? They never said they were to you. So where would they end up? They would end up in hell if they are not saved. Remember, it's that one thing. And we have emotions involved in this game. So this is what we struggle with. Also, we cannot see hell yet. We have to trust that what God says is true. And we have every reason to, but it's not something that we can see. And so seeing it as truth or believing it as truth it's a struggle. We're believing words on a paper. We haven't seen the action yet. So here's the problem with the question. Why would a loving God, because most people proclaim that God is love, create a place of punishment? How do love and punishment fit together? Because he's the creator of both places. I'm going to stop and turn the page for just a second. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. We're going back to this way, and I'll just let my hands shake. Okay. So from that question, how do love and punishment fit together? We wonder, or people in general would wonder, is God a people punisher? And you'll see Romans 9:13 there. And it says in the Bible, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I hated. In the Bible, it sounds like God might be a people punisher. Is that how love and punishment go together? Or is God a punisher of evil in that he's justice? He is a just God. For that, you have Psalm 5:4-5 says, for you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. And Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So when we talk about that, is God a people punisher? Like he just chooses people he doesn't like and he punishes them? Or is he a punisher of evil? And it really doesn't matter who does the evil, he has to punish the evil. Well, God is a God of justice. Meaning, so what does justice mean? Justice is the act of making things legally and morally right. If there is an infinite debt, then it has to be paid. If there's a moral debt, it has to be paid. Justice is also known as truth in relationships. Justice is something God is and something God delights in. Jeremiah 9:24 says, I am the Lord who practices steadfast love, justice, and righteousness in the earth, for in these things I delight. Now you might stop and you say, but what about Romans 9:13? It really sounds like he just chose who he loved and who he hated. But if you look at the rest of the verses and you look at the rest of the Bible, you find out that, you know what? God did love Jacob and he did hate Esau. But why did he hate Esau? He hated Esau because Esau was wicked. Which brings us to the next, there it looks like 4 paragraphs. So this is a long way around, but we're taking it. We know God is a God of justice. What does that mean? It means that good and evil exist and God cares enough to deal with desperately evil people. Esau was desperately evil. So what did God do? Well, because humans could never pay the infinite debt we owe, God sacrificed his perfect and only Son, Jesus, on a cross to be able to offer anyone who believes right standing, be freed from the infinite debt, and have access to a life based on truth. And if people choose not to believe, they can do that. But God's order is what we will be judged by. If someone chooses not to believe, they will go to hell. A person who chooses not to believe is choosing to reject God. Why would they want to spend eternity with someone they reject? When we try and diminish hell's importance, it also diminishes the love and justice of God. Why would we spend so much time poring over and learning the Bible if everybody just gets into heaven, no questions asked? What would be the point of telling the truth? What would be the point of living a righteous life? What would be the point of choosing Jesus if everybody just gets in? And then if heaven was like that, then we have a God who does not care that good and evil exist, because he's just going to let anybody in. Now, the short way to say what's in those paragraphs is down below here in bold. So really, I'm saying the same thing, different words in a shorter way. The coexistence of love and justice in God's nature make it so he can forgive sin. Main statements. First, you got to have sin. I am sinful and have a debt. You can put, anybody can be the I there. We all humans do. God is holy. He's perfect, so he can judge. God is loving, so he can forgive. Forgive means save. Forgive means free. He did all the work. And God is king, so forgiveness is done his way. God is also visible to everyone on the earth, so everyone knows and is accountable. So the correct perspective to have when we're talking about what's the deal with hell is really, who is God and who am I in relation to him? I'm going to turn the page. Almost done. It's entertaining music while I switch the page. Sorry about that. Some of you already know all of that, but this is worth repeating. So let's go into what the Bible says about hell. Where is it? Describe it and its purpose. Where is hell? It is, according to Matthew 25, it is a place prepared for the devil and his angels. In describing it from Matthew and Revelation and Mark and Luke, it is a place of outer darkness. It is outside the gate of the city of God, away from the presence of the Lord, a perpetually burning dump, a place of anguish and regret. In other words, it is permanent exile from God, the world, and all that is good, beautiful, whole, and meaningful. And it is impossible to return to God's presence. It is everlasting. Once you are there forever. What is the purpose of hell? Well, first of all, maybe not first of all, but one of the two purposes of hell: punishment and retribution. Now, these go hand in hand. We kind of talked about it already. Punishment, that's your penalty for sin, or penalty for sin. If you lie, it is paying the debt of lying. Okay? The retribution aspect is who you're paying. All of our sins are against God. And remember, he is an infinite creature. So, retribution is paying the penalty against an infinite being. So the punishment is payment for your sin. The retribution is that sin, that penalty, is against God. So it is an infinite penalty. Who talked about it? Well, Jesus. He talked about it the most. Why do you think he talked about it? Well, he would be the one who knew the reality. He knew whether hell was real or not. He also knew the solution, and we can surmise that he didn't want people to go there. Remember, he said, I came to seek and save the lost. And when people become part of his family, when they become Christians, he offers freedom, not enslavement. Here's some thoughts. And people might fight you with this, but I want you to think through it. You don't, or a person, I'm not talking about you personally. It's just, it's a lovely pronoun. A person doesn't miss heaven or hell by a hair. Okay? Those who go to hell want to be away from God, or they want the pleasure of sin. And now they are away from God and they have the pleasures of sin. Hell is chosen one sin at a time. There is a process by which a person gradually becomes fit for hell as they choose sin after sin after sin, and or as they reject God time and time and time again. So whoever is in hell did not miss heaven by a hair. They got in shape for hell, so to speak. Let's end with where is heaven, because you can't talk about hell without talking about heaven. Where is heaven? Well, according to Psalms 103, it is where God dwells and the angels. There are multiples of heavens in the Bible. There's like a first, a second, and third. I know I put those out of order. Sometimes when the Bible talks about the heavens, it is talking about the sky, so you have to read carefully. But when it talks about paradise, that is always heaven. And there are different paradises, different in that they're referenced as either the first or the third heaven. I think if you look in Revelation, you'll see third heaven. I'll check that out. It might not be in Revelation. Anyway, heaven is also not described, but where it is, it's always near God's children. And that comes from James 4:8, which is just a lovely way to think about it, because when Jesus came and he spoke, he said, I've come to bring the kingdom. So when a person agrees with Jesus that they're a sinner and that he died and he rose again and he paid for their sins, we're marked with the Holy Spirit. We have a connection to God. We are near him, and so we have a piece of heaven at that moment. How to describe heaven? This is all from Revelation 21. It is positionally with God and with Jesus. There's fellowship, there is worship. It has been prepared for family, and when I say concrete, it's really, really, really real. There is no sin there. There is no desire to sin, and that your desires are only for good. There is no death there, no pain there, and sorrow. There are no tears and no shame. And what is the purpose of heaven as opposed to the purpose of hell, which was punishment and retribution? The purpose of heaven is to set things right and live forever. Set things right and live forever. Sometimes it seems like it's impossible, but it is really, really real. And it is really, really, really going to happen. I made it under 30 minutes. Woohoo! Have a good weekend.